Welcome to the Beyond Sugar Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Dame, holistic nutrition coach and speaker. Let's dive in. All right, everyone, welcome back. We are being joined by a very special guest today. Michelle Hurn, my good friend, is here in the podcast studio with us. How's it going, Michelle?
Hey, it's good. Thank you so much for having me.
God, I'm so excited to have you here. Really, your story, I remember meeting you when I interviewed you for the Quit Sugar Summit, and just was so blown away with your story and what you've been through and the actual experience you had working as a dietitian in the hospitals and in the actual quote unquote traditional medical system. And I love, everything that you have to share and everything that you've learned from that. So without further ado, let's dive right into that. And for those who don't know who you are, I read your bio in the intro, little Cole's notes, but share a little bit more about your story. I think it's so fascinating, what you saw and actually having this like on the ground, real knowledge of what's going on in hospitals, in medical systems, with dietitians and your journey kind of through that and out of that. Would love to hear.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thank you. My story really begins, and I'll try to give the Reader's Digest version here. When I was 12, I was diagnosed with anorexia nervosa. I was almost 5 feet tall and about 57 and a half pounds, so incredibly underweight. Went to inpatient treatment for 60 days, and that was my first interaction, with the dietitian. And at that time, I was also put on a 24-hour tube feeding system. I, had severe anxiety. I had all kinds of GI issues. And there were even things at that point, I remember as a 12-year-old that didn't really make sense. I did gain weight. I did become weight restored, but I was told, that I would likely suffer with eating disordered thoughts and tendencies, severe anxiety, periods of depression, even suicidal ideation, like throughout my life. They just said this is, people don't really recover. People, you're going to struggle. Like, you have to be ready. And so I just remember thinking, like, God, I'm going to have to become this like high functioning person with an eating disorder. And that's kind of how I lived my life. I was, pretty successful in academics, and I joined our cross country team. But I wanted to be a dietitian. I knew nutrition was powerful. Like I said, I'd become weight restored. But they were correct in that I had chronic anxiety. I had periods of my life that I would have severe panic attacks. I couldn't go to work. At times I couldn't go to school. A lot of anxiety around racing, competing when I was in, sports. And, but I knew, like I said, nutrition was powerful. It was my thought and my theory that blood sugar stability, like that is what we need to do. Every human, whether you're diabetic or not, it needs to eat lots of whole grains. We're taught as dietitians, like sugar in moderation, lean protein. And, that was kind of the type of eating that I followed as a young adult, and certainly throughout my early adolescence. And, I was very lean and, but I, like I said, just suffered severe anxiety. And, I finished my degree. To become a dietitian, you get your 4-year degree in dietetics, and then you get into an internship. But when I did my internship, it was the first time I actually worked with dietitians. You're in the clinic with the preceptors. And I just remember, I saw things that didn't make sense. We would go into the room of someone who has a type 2 diabetic, and the dietitian would tell me, like, hey, look, we're going to teach them to have, 60 to 75 grams of carbohydrates at each meal and 15 grams of carbohydrates at each snack. And I was just like, wait, I thought they're diabetic. I thought their blood sugar is high. Like, shouldn't we teach them to eat less carbohydrates or not very many? And then, oh no, Michelle, carbohydrates are important. Every person needs carbohydrates. And we were also told you don't want to restrict sugar or carbohydrates, because by doing that, people are just going to overeat on it. Like, never do that for any disease state, whether they're diabetic or kidney failure, or have eating disorders. But you're new, right? You're a student. So I was just like, okay, I'm learning. Maybe there's something I don't know. I shared we went to the ICU. And I remember flipping over the tube feeding ingredients. And at that time, I was 25 years old. I was like, oh my gosh, this was the same stuff that was in tube feeding when I was 12. And it's the same today. I'm going to be 39. And the number one tube feeding ingredients are, canola oil, corn syrup, maltodextrin, soy protein. And, you're only tube fed if you're not allowed to, if you can't eat or you can't maintain calories. So if you've been in a traumatic car accident, potentially, a cancer patient, you have a bowel obstruction. So I just would ask as a student, I was like, oh wow, is this really the best way to feed somebody who's been in a traumatic accident? And so I was kind of pegged as this like, Michelle is this difficult dietetic student with all her questions. But I became a dietitian, and really quickly in the hospital system is really challenging. You're given so many patients. You have to chart for a lot on each patient, and you're only given minutes to see patients. And you also are required to teach the guidelines, and we know that the standard guidelines are just not working for a type 2 diabetic. I mean, they cannot tolerate carbs, and we're taught to give them carbs. People who have, like, the idea of a sugar or carbohydrate addiction is considered nonsense in the dietetic realm, where we know that, foods are designed to be hyper processed and hyper palatable. And so we basically we're setting our people up to fail. And so, I struggled in that system, and I saw a lot of sickness, and it was like a cycle. People would come in, they'd be sick, they might get a tiny bit better, and they'd come back and they were worse. And it starts to wear on you, and there's kind of a mantra in healthcare that it's just like, oh, it's not the guidelines that are the problem, it's the patient. If the patient would only follow the guidelines. But from my experience, that wasn't true. Most people were really trying to what they thought was eat healthy, eat low fat, lots of carbs, vegetables, fruits, whatever. And it was a really broken system, but it wasn't until 2019 when I lost my own health that I really made a drastic change. And that's kind of what started my, my advocacy.
Wow. So what happened then for you in 2019?
Yeah, so I was trying to qualify for the Olympic trials and the marathon. So I'm a long distance runner, and to do that, you have to run under 2 hours and 45 minutes. You did then. Now they've made it even more difficult. But so I was training a lot. I was working at 2 different hospital facilities, a psychiatric facility and acute care facility. And just suddenly I just kind of noticed my body wasn't recovering very well from my running. And disproportionate to what I was running. Like, I was really sore. I was starting to have more anxiety, and you start to think like, oh, well, maybe I'm just tired, maybe things aren't going well. I saw my family doctor, things came back fine. I reached out to 2 different sports dietitians, said, hey, this is what I'm doing. What do you guys think? And they both said, oh, you're not eating enough. You need more carbohydrates. And at that time, I was eating 350 grams of carbohydrates. So I said, are you sure? This seems like a lot of carbohydrates. And no, you need more. And of course, I'm very driven and motivated. So I ate more fruit, more sugar, more bread, and things went from bad to worse. I started getting cold sweats. I'd go for 2 or 3 mile runs. I'm sweating. I felt anxious. Had, more panic attacks. It was bad. It was really, really bad. And then it got to kind of the turning point. I had a bad day at work. We actually had a patient pass away that I had been working with. I oversaw oncology as well. And, I came home, fell asleep early, and I woke up at like 2 a.m, and it just felt like my body was on fire. Like, everything hurt. And I'm just sitting in the kitchen. I'm like, I don't know what to do. At this point I tried, over the counter, like ibuprofen. I tried stronger stuff. I tried alcohol. I tried a lot of stuff. And I'm just sitting there like, I don't know what to do. And so I ended up driving to our local gas station and got, 30 pounds of ice, put it in the bathtub at 3 a.m. I'm sitting in an ice bath crying. And that's when my wife came in and was like, I think we should do something different. I think you need to do something different. And I was just like, yes, like, it is beyond time. This is stupid. I mean, what am I doing? I'm 36. I'm too old to competitively run, So I just said, yeah, I'm done. I'm no longer running. Like, I was broken. And at that point, I'd been running since I was 14 years old. So over 2 decades. And I said, forget the marathon dream. Forget it. I'm done. And, I had no idea at that moment, you just feel like you're losing your dream. You're in pain, that everything would change. Everything would change. Because the next day I was like, well, if I'm not going to run, why not follow a low carb diet for a period of time? I kind of intuitively knew that carbs didn't make me feel good, but I was just so indoctrinated with, oh, you need them. Carbs in moderation, sugar's fine. So that, I decided I would do a 30-day trial of a ketogenic diet, and then I discovered the carnivore diet. And that's when I was like, oh, let's try this. And of course, my wife was like, that's nuts, that's eating disordered. because and as a traditional dietitian, you're just really not taught about bioavailability. I didn't know. I mean, you kind of casually know that, like, oh, heme iron and non-heme iron, but I had no idea that so much of the, oats and plants and food, fibrous foods I was eating were probably blocking a lot of the iron and calcium and other things my body needed. So yeah, I mean, I thought I was just going to do this high meat, high fat diet for 30 days. Maybe my muscles would feel better with all the protein. Then I didn't really, I didn't really have a plan after that, but I had kind of made a commitment to myself to give that a try.
Yeah. So where did that take you? Like, tell us about that 30 days. Like, what changed? How
Yeah,
did
so
you
like I
feel?
said, my wife is very anti, because once again, we're eating disorder treatment. We are taught you cannot ex-nave a food group,
Right.
because this person already has issues with eating, that will further exacerbate the problem.
Mhm.
Um, but like I said, I just had this interesting like feeling, like I don't know why, but I feel like I'm supposed to do this. And so, I was still working at the hospital at the time. So, 4 other dietitians are there in the morning. Everyone's got their bagels, bananas, or donuts and coffee. And I'm in here with my like pounded ground beef and butter. They're like, well, that's different. They kind of like, everybody was just like, Michelle Strange, whatever. At first they were just didn't say too much. And honestly, the first 40 days were not great. I'd been such a high carbohydrate human. I had a really bad headache. I didn't know about electrolytes or anything like that. So I remember I drove home. It was like the third or fourth day, and it was just like, oh my God, like just even the traffic lights, like my head hurt so bad. And my wife was just like, "How's that going?" And I couldn't be like, "Oh my God, I want to die." I'm like, "It's great, everything's fine, leave me alone." But then, of course, I saw like, oh shoot, I should be taking potassium, magnesium. So once I took fluids and electrolytes, like public service announcement, everyone going low carb, electrolytes is not optional. Um, by like the 7th day, I noticed that like my muscles weren't hurting, but I was kind of like, well, maybe I'm not running. And then we were in a meeting. I was in a work meeting, and one of my dietitian coworkers was like kind of shaky, and she like whispered, was like, "Michelle, I'm gonna get a snack. Do you need a snack?" And I was like, "No, I'm gonna eat lunch around noon." And she was like, "It's 2." And I remember being like, "Whoa!" Like I just went like 5 hours without eating. No universe had that happened in years. Like I was eating every 2 to 3 hours. I'd eat breakfast and I'd be like looking at my watch at 10:30. I was constantly eating because I was constantly hungry. I was constantly eating these floury, these processed foods. And so that was really strange to me. And then I also noticed, like, I actually felt calm. I wasn't hungry. I wasn't worried about food because I was just eating meat and butter and coffee and just going along with my day. But yeah, kind of the big pivotal moment I talk about a lot is around the 3-week mark. I came home and my wife was like sitting on the couch and was like, "Can you come here?" And I was a little scared, like, "Oh no, what happened?"
We need to talk.
And she just like took my hand and was like, "Hey, I don't know what to say. I don't know if I like this way of eating yet, but your anxiety is the best it's been in the 11 years that I've known you. Like you're not anxious, you're sleeping, you're happy. I don't." So we were both just like, "What is going on?" Like she's a scientist, She's like, we got to know why. We have to know why this is happening." And so from that point on, like I said, I still worked at the hospital, so I had access to every clinical trial you can think of. And I was shocked and angry that there were so many trials on low carbohydrate eating and type 2 diabetes specifically. There's just oodles of them on how on blood sugar stability and being able to lower your A1C. And there was lots of anecdotes, not trials, but on mental health. And from that point on, I spent the next several weeks just diving into podcasts and research and of course, when you start to feel better, I felt better. It's like you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
Like a lifetime of anxiety, and I was fine. A lifetime of obsessing, worrying, struggling with food, and I was happy. I was eating fat. I was eating tons of fat, more than I in my entire life. And of course, I a little bit naively thought that everyone in the hospital was going to be real excited about this. Like, oh, my coworkers are going to rally around this, and we're going to be able to teach patients. And I was immediately told, like, no, like, I'm glad this is working for you, but you can't teach this. This is against the guidelines. If you teach this, could be in trouble. And so that was hard because it was like all of a sudden I felt like I had this tool, and I even had the clinical trials. I was like, I I have this information that can help people. But I was told, no, you have to keep giving the information that doesn't help people.
Wow. Wow. So, yeah, that's so powerful, Michelle, like everything that you saw and noticed, and good on you for taking that plunge and saying, like, I know and a lot of people listening, that can often be the hardest part. It's like no one around you really gets it or really supports you in the way that you need. And here you are doing it anyway, right? Because you hit your rock bottom and you knew something had to change. You have to try something, right? And what beautiful, validation to have those around you and your wife, really notice the changes, right? Probably before you notice it. That's so funny how we do that, right? Like we don't notice things in ourselves until someone else points them out. Usually that's just human nature, but
Yeah. And it was funny because I tried to excuse it away, like, oh, well, it's because I'm not running, or oh, maybe that's why I'm sleeping better. But because it almost seems like too good to be true, right? Like, and like I said, you become a little angry. You're like, you got to be telling me I've suffered for 20 years. And like I said, I had patients have diabetes that died. And I was like, we literally have information that can flip their disease state in weeks to months, So
what do you think they're like having access and having worked in that world, what do you think is the disconnect from like, we obviously know so much and the research is there. Why is it not being taught? Like, where's the disconnect there? And why are dietitians and still preaching the high fructose corn syrup concoctions that they're pumping into people? What do you see as the huge disconnect, and how do we, the bigger question, how do we fix that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the disconnect comes with the education. And you have, the Academy of Nutrition, which used to be called the American Dietetics Association. So you have this governing board that is responsible for your education, for the education, not only the education of dietitians, but their continuing education. And, since 2008, like when I became a dietitian in 2009, they were heavily sponsored. I mean, I knew then they were heavily sponsored by processed foods. Like the number one sponsors back then were Hershey's, Coca-Cola, Frito-Lay, Sara Lee. So I refused. You don't have to be a member to be, to become a dietitian. I was like, I don't like this. This doesn't feel good. And so I think that's where the disconnect comes in. And it's very smart and crafty, because if let's say companies like Coca-Cola and Sara Lee, if they told dietitians like, hey, yeah, you got to tell your type 2 diabetic to like drink a Coke and eat our cake, most like humans with a brain would be like, oh, we can't do that. So they don't do that. What they do is they say, yeah, you need to encourage your person to eat healthy, but we don't want to deprive them. Tell them to have a Coke in moderation. Tell them to have this cake in moderation. It's brilliant. It's brilliant marketing, because those companies, I mean, most of those companies, Frito-Lay, Sara Lee, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Unilever, Abbott, they all have food scientists working for them whose only job is to find out how to make their products as, addictive to the human brain as possible. So they teach us, they tell us to tell these patients to have these foods in moderation, knowing that when these patients eat these foods, it's impossible to moderate. Not only on a brain level, it kind of overrides your brain, the neurochemicals in your brain, neurotransmitters. But also, I mean, you and I know, anytime you eat a, highly processed sugary food, you get a rise in blood sugar. You also get a you get an insulin response. That's going to crash your blood sugar and cause you to want more sugar. So your brain, you get that dopamine hit in your brain telling you, oh, this is great. It can mess with other neurotransmitters like glutamate and GABA. So you basically have
A broken system.
you have a system that's working against you.
Yeah, that's so eye-opening, Michelle. Thank you for vocalizing that. I think the more we hear that, the more we can start to like actually see the truth of what's going on. I just had a good friend of mine, Maddie Lansdowne, on a couple episodes ago, and we went into this as well, talking about like the billion-dollar marketing, psychology departments that exist at these food companies, right? And why they're there. And, I think we can't ignore, so many of us have just given over all responsibility for our health to the, to the medical system, right? And dietitians and,
Yes.
Assuming people are going to
Yes.
know.
Well, and we've like lost common sense.
Totally.
We've totally lost common sense. And you can see this. I'll give you a couple examples of just a recent travel where, well, first of all, let's get real quick common sense. If you get back to like how humans evolved, like throughout evolution, Humans evolved eating large megafauna, meat and fat. We evolved eating that. And now we have this narrative that meat causes cancers and inflammatory. If that was true, humans wouldn't exist. Like that's like if you don't know anything about science, like that's we had plants, but they were very small, bitter. They were nothing like the plants we have today. Like common sense. And then when it comes to your eating, I'm amazed. People will eat anything given to them. And if you don't believe me, get on a plane flight. People handing out these little pretzels and peanuts with sugar and nonsense. People just eat it like nothing. Are you hungry? Who knows? It doesn't. People, a hotel I stayed at, I have never seen so many obese children. It was very sad. You know, in the breakfast buffet, kids are getting Frosted Flakes and donuts, and I'm like, what is going on? Like, this is not food. We're not feeding our children food. You know, on the plane flight back, this woman handed her little kid, couldn't have been more than 4, literally opened a box of Lucky Charms, took the thing out and handed it to her. The kid is just eating it away. 2 hours later, she's screaming and crying. And I'm like, well, call on me. I know why your kid's angry. You know, it's we've lost common sense, and we've let these big food companies, they care about your health, not at all. Okay, every nurse, every doctor, every dietitian, every human I've ever worked with genuinely cares. They want to do well. They care about your health. Like healthcare, pharmaceuticals, and food companies, they have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders to make money. That is all it is. This is a capitalist society. If they heal you, if they help you, if they get you better, they lose money.
Yeah.
If they kill you, they lose money. There's no arsenic or anything in foods. They have to keep you perpetually sick. It's sad, but that is the only way to make money. So I think we have to come to terms with, you know, these big food companies who are in charge of our dietitians' education, in charge of our food, in charge of our pharmaceuticals. They do not want to see you well.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Thank you for saying that. I think that's going to be a tough pill for a lot of listeners to swallow, but it's an important one to really realize, right? We've given all of our trust and power away to, you know, companies that are driven by profit. And yes, all of these amazing doctors and dietitians and people who like are in their industry because they want to help are unfortunately being taught, right, through this information, these textbooks that were made practically by Coca-Cola, right, by these companies that.
Yes.
So the system is broken. You know, the people want to help, but there's this disconnect, and I think that's just like so infuriating to realize and understand, but also a chance to really be empowered. You know, I think the best thing any of us can do, and I'd be curious your thoughts on this, right, is just starting to ask better questions, right? Understanding instead of just blindly trusting what information is being thrown at you, especially if it's coming in the media or from, you know, someone of authority. You know, how can we actually start just asking, like, how do you get paid? You know, where does your information come from? You know, I think we really do put a lot of people on a pedestal, especially if they're wearing a white lab coat, right? And we think they know everything, and they know everything that's going to be good for us. And, you know, their intentions are probably well, but what they've learned, you know, has been, you know, put there from maybe not so great places. So really asking better questions. I don't know if you see that as one of the solutions out, or what other ways you think people can, you know, start empowering themselves and, you know, shifting out of this whole, you know, giving all of our trust to somebody else and forgetting our common sense. How do we start getting our common sense back? I guess is my question.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're asking a lot, you're asking all the right questions. I do think we need to start asking better questions, because I think, you know, like I said, what we're doing right now is definitely not working. And so I think asking your doctor or your dietitian, saying like, has this way of eating what you're teaching, are you seeing results? How many people are you getting off medication?
Right.
And, you know, like most doctors that I've talked to, when they traditionally prescribe this consistent carbohydrate diet, they weren't getting anybody off medication. You know, asking dietitians, it's hard though, because even if you asked a dietitian, like, yeah, I'm interested in a keto diet, like, can you tell me about that? A lot of dietitians are just taught that it's bad for you, it's bad for their heart. There's a lot of fear mongering and falsehood around it. So what I do, and what I encourage anybody to do, you know, when I wrote my book, read a lot on both sides. Be very well educated on low carbohydrate. I mean, I wanted to understand where are the vegans coming from, where are the high carb people coming from, where are the low carb people coming from, where is Coca-Cola coming from? You know, even though I already know a lot of profit driven here. But you want to educate yourself, because it's very easy to get excited about one thing or to think this is the only way to do something. But you want to make sure you understand, you know, and also just like you said, just asking questions, because it would be my hope and my goal and my advocacy, because I'm like, I honestly, I don't really care what anyone wants to do or decides to eat or how they want to live their life. That's, you know, I think everybody, as long as you have capacity, because, you know, I worked in mental health, not everybody has capacity, but as long as you have capacity, you need to be able to make your own choices. But I think it's a tragedy that we don't explain. Like what I see happen all the time, where I saw, I'm no longer in the hospital setting, someone who's type 2 diabetic, you know, doctor will come in and say, we're going to do this insulin regimen. The dietitian is going to teach you how to eat these carbohydrates, and then you're going to follow up with me. But what they don't say is, well, and you know, within a few months, you're probably going to start to lose your eyesight. You're probably going to have a limb amputated in a few years. Your teeth are going to rot. Like, we need to tell people the side effects, and we need to say, hey, you know what? If you follow a low carb diet, you statistically, we've got good studies. We have the Verta Health studies too. You could be a lot better within months. You know, like, I want people to have their options laid out to them. You know, I want people to understand the benefits and the risk. I want to get rid of this fear mongering that we've proven over and over and over again, that saturated fat is not bad and that elevated LDL may actually be beneficial to you. Like, we've got to start talking to people as healthcare professionals. But I mean, once again, we're also limited with time.
Yeah.
But it would be my hope that more patients just ask, and just, you know, if your doctor isn't willing to give you the time of day or cannot answer your questions, it's okay to fire your doctor. You know, most insurance plans will let you get to pick, you get a network of several people you can go see. And there are a lot of doctors. It's interesting. The more health professionals I've talked to now are working outside of insurance. They're like, I charge cash. I don't even take insurance, so I don't have to do what they tell me. I actually want to help people, you know? So there are other options to find good healthcare providers. But yeah, you've got to ask. You've got to demand answers, you know? And if they can't give them to you to your satisfaction, then, like I said, you know, fire.
Move on, right? Yeah.
Move on. Like a bad relationship. You don't need that.
Yeah. Like with your accountant or your hairdresser, right? If they don't listen to you, you're probably going to go and or answer your questions about, you know.
Yeah. Imagine if you got to dyed your hair pink and shaved your head. You'd be like, I'm never seeing that human again. Right. You wouldn't be like, well, they know more than me, you know,
right. They're professional. They went to school. They must know what's best for my hair. Right.
You should leave. It's like a good friend. Like, you should leave empowered. Like, if you do not leave your dietitian or doctor's office feeling like, I have a plan to better my health, unless you know, if you're going on palliative care or something, that's a different story. But most people, if you're diabetic, you're obese, you have some heart issues, kidney, you should leave saying, I have a plan to be better. Not they've just given me medication, I'm just going to do the same shit. No, you need to, if you don't feel empowered and lifted up and supported, move on.
Wow. Yeah, that's so well said. That's so good. I want to come back and touch on something you talked about earlier that I think is really important, and, you know, a topic that is so relevant to this podcast and everything that we stand for here in this understanding. A lot of people, and I'm really excited to hear your take on this, because I know you've been through, you know, eating disorders and the mental toll, you know, with food. And you mentioned about that earlier, you know, is going on carnivore or keto, is that not just another eating disorder, right? That limiting kind of mentality of you can't eat something, right? And what that does to your mind. So do you see that as, and I kind of know the answer to that question, but what are your thoughts around how is low carb not just another, you know, dangerous path for anybody out there listening who's, you know, suffered with eating disorders in the past?
Yeah, you know, there's this saying that we've gotten so immersed in this diet culture that eating real whole foods now is an eating disorder, which is silly and crazy. And I'll address both. Let's say, you know, if you're someone suffering with say binge eating disorder or bulimia, you know, I spoke with a woman who said they told me I would know I was well when I could eat all foods in moderation. And she went to several different treatment facilities, and she would do well for a while, but anytime she'd have a Snickers or a cookie or something, she would start binging again. And, you know, we are really fortunate now that we have a case study, you know, 3 different people with severe binge eating disorder, lifelong, decades of binge eating disorder. and they were put on a ketogenic diet and followed for over a year. And all three people, in different parts of the US, didn't know each other, had total remission of their symptoms. And not only that, they were all morbidly obese. They all lost weight. They all reported they weren't hungry, and they had statistically significant improvement in mood. And so what happened, once again, if you went to a traditional eating disorder place, they'd say, you can't do that. You can't tell them to eat low carb. Well, they were being fed food that their body could actually utilize and absorb. It goes back to that bioavailable nutrition. The body does not absorb a lot of these high carbohydrate foods very well. The human body is really designed to absorb meat and fat. That's what we evolved on. And if your system, your intestinal epithelium, and we can kind of cross this over to anorexia, if you starve yourself or if you're binging and purging, you have likely damaged your GI system. A damaged GI system does not absorb nutrition very well. When I went into inpatient eating disorder treatment, I was immediately fed, all this sugar and the tube feeding formula and all these carbs and stuff. I had severe GI issues. And if you're in treatment, they often tell you like, oh, it's in your head. You hurt. Your system's not absorbing food very well. So a low carbohydrate diet also it really removes a lot of those inflammatory foods, those sugars and flours, and it provides just these highly absorbable, bioavailable nutrition. And one thing that it does is it stabilizes your blood sugar. And we know, just regardless if you have an eating disorder or not, stable blood sugar reduces anxiety like across the board because you just feel good. Your energy is stable. You're not getting those energy spikes and crashes. So when you eat this way, all of a sudden you have stable blood sugar and energy. You're able to absorb and utilize the nutrition. And it also balances and provides the precursors for the neurotransmitters in your brain. So, when people say that, like, oh, you have to be able to eat all foods, I'm like, that's fair, but then we have to redefine food. Because Oreos are not food. Coca-Cola is not food. Things that, fruits, vegetables, meats, fats, those are food. And those are things that certainly I think can, be utilized on a low carbohydrate diet or a low carbohydrate approach. So yeah, I've seen it play out over and over again in various eating disorders. Several people with anorexia, I presented on this, and then obviously binge eating disorder and bulimia. When you remove those inflammatory foods, when you remove those foods that for some people cause addictive-like behaviors, it really can become a game changer in their life. And saying that it's restrictive or it's, restrictive to not eat sugar or eat bread or whatever is just preposterous. To me, it would be equivalent of saying like, oh, if you're an alcoholic, you need to be able to have alcohol in moderation. It's just some people just cannot do that, and it's not ideal for them. So it's just recognizing and giving respect. It's like I don't eat, we don't eat sugar. We don't eat a lot of that nonsense anymore. In my life, I've never felt more free or more liberated. And that doesn't mean, and I like to be very careful, this is not a low calorie or low fat or whatever way of eating. This is especially if you're needing to regain weight. I mean, this is a 5,000 to 8,000 calorie way of eating for weight gain, or certainly, 2,000 to 3,000 for maintenance. But it is, restrictive. Restrictive is when you're sitting on the sidelines of your own life. Like I said, I had panic attacks. I have permanent scars on my wrists from self-injury, suicidal ideation. Lots of very painful things. And I know many people who've suffered from even suicide attempts, obesity, all kinds of things. That's a restrictive life. Not eating sugar or not eating a Snicker bar, that's okay.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. That's really powerful, Michelle. And I really appreciate that thought pattern of understanding, right? Like this word freedom, and redefining food. I think that's like a big message that I want to pull out of there. It's like, yeah, this kind of idea of, you'll be healed from, these eating disorders once you can moderate food, any food, right? But that word food, we're confused. We're confused. We think canola oil is food and processed things are food and Oreos are food, right? That's not food.
It's not, and we have to be okay with, we have, this is not like underground data, we know that when you consume a lot of those canola oils, seed oils, sugar, and flours, they have the same impact on glutamate, like the one of the neurotransmitters of your brain, that either a major trauma or illicit drugs have. They actually can shift glutamate up to 100 times the normal level. And what that does is it basically suppresses neuroplasticity. It stops your brain from being able to mold, change, and take in new information and cope with stress. So people, I mean, if you look around our planet, people are crumbling under normal stress, you know? And what we need to do is stop eating all these crappy foods. But what people do is they're like, oh, I'm stressed. I should eat, I'm going to eat more crappy foods. So it's this cycle. And I mean, it's like we were just saying about eating disorder recovery. If you are doing everything you can, if you're going to therapy, if you're trying to process your trauma, you need to be able to take in new information. You need your brain to function in synapse. You cannot have glutamate levels going through the roof. So there's just, it's frustrating even just from this like physiological level. We know that these foods are not good for us.
Yeah, and there's this obviously, in those areas, all of us, right, where we commit to this journey of healing, we go ahead and we start doing all of this amazing inner work, right? Going to therapy, getting, healing, doing some energy healing, like whatever path you're following, and really healing some trauma and doing these things. And, we can't break through because at the other end of the spectrum, right? Like our body is flooded with like literal chemicals that are preventing us from like actual inner peace and freedom and real release of this healing. And I relate to your story, Michelle. Anxiety was always like my big thing. I had a lot of anxiety growing up, and I know now, like, oh my goodness, that was sugar induced because I was just counting sugar all the time. Mind you, there were lots of other, more deeper rooted issues as well that were leading to anxiety. It's not just about sugar, but I mean, we can't ignore the effects that it's having on our moods and our brains, and that, when we talk about restriction, like that is the restricted way of living, like you mentioned, right? Versus being free and being at peace and knowing how to handle stress. You're not never going to feel stress. Like, of course we are, we're human beings, but being able to navigate it in a way. And sometimes I'll experiment with this. Like I still eat sugar, in moderation occasionally. And, sometimes I'll notice when I do, not only it affects my sleep, just like alcohol would, but I do notice like, if I have some sugar multiple days in a row, I'll notice my mood start to shift. Like I'm very, very sensitive and very aware of like when that's happening. So I don't let it get to where it used to. And it's really interesting to even just start doing this experiment on yourself, right? And start proving to yourself, I think that's the best motivation. Like you noticed, right? When you do these changes and make those shifts and then, really start noticing in your own body, it becomes so much easier to kind of stick with it, right?
100%. And like you said, like we're all going to have stress. Like life is stress, and we're all going to have things happen. But the point is like ideally you want to be in a place where you can deal with it, you can roll with it, you can process it, you can move on, And I think, my experience is when you're constantly bombarding your body with a lot of sugar, a lot of flour, a lot of other things, it can be really hard. It's like putting that extra almost like block. So for me, it really opened up and let me be able to work through a lot of things for sure.
Yeah. So in the beginning stages, I'm just thinking of, what everybody would love some tips and advice on that are listening, as you start shifting out of, eating all the sugar and the stuff. Obviously you had a lot of kind of walls up against you, right? You were still working as a dietitian, nobody really understood. They were like, Michelle, you're crazy, right? Your wife was even a little skeptical. Like,
yeah, I was like,
she was like, oh, this doesn't sound like a good idea. How did you, mentally, physically, emotionally, like, how did you get through those first couple months, right? Where you really had to be your own cheerleader? Like, what did you do to kind of stay on track and stay motivated? I know so many people listening really struggle with the motivation and commitment to healing in this way, especially when they can't have that donut that they wanted, right? So what did you use? Like what really helped you get through?
Yeah, I think what was really helpful, like that night that, I was in the bathtub and at 2 and 3 in the morning, obviously, got out and was able to sleep a little bit. But that next day I did something that I tell people, even before you think about food or changing, that I'm really glad I did. And I kind of named it like radical honesty. As I just sat down, I had to work. I just sat down before work and just wrote down like things that I was really unhappy about. My life wasn't good. And this isn't like, oh, I suck. This isn't like, this was like, I remember, I look back at it sometimes, I'm in pain. I'm really short with my wife. I don't like my job. I'm never, I mean, at that time I said, I'm no longer going to run. I yelled at my dog. Like I was not a happy person, and so I just like, this is what's going on in my life. And then I made another section. I said, this is what I would like my life to look like. And I remember writing like, I want to be happy with what I'm doing. I want a cold in my, I want to like things that just even simple, like I don't want to be in pain anymore. And so I remember just like staring at that for a minute, being like, wow, things are really bad. Like I didn't even realize, like I knew it was bad, but I was like, I was like, God, I yelled at my dog the other day. I'm so anxious, So just getting like honest with yourself, because I think sometimes we get going and it's just so easy to get sidetracked. But I remembered like, man, I really want to feel better. And I also believed, I said, you know what? I'm lucky that I've run for so many years. I was a distance runner. You put in the work every single day with the goal of racing like 1 or 2 times a year, So I had this just, once again, I don't even know why I just believe so strongly with this, but I was just wanted to know, like, if I could just do this for 30 days, like, could my life look more like the second half of the paper versus this first half? And I wanted to know, because I was, like I said, I was really unhappy and I was really a mess. And, I was fortunate, and I believe that change can happen relatively quickly. Like I said, my pain dissipated quickly, my anxiety healed pretty quickly. And so when things started to get better, that was really motivating. I'm also, I'm not afraid to be a little bit weird. Maybe that's just, I'm lucky with that, because some people tell me like, I don't want to be that one person out. And I was just like, well, sorry. 88% of people in our country are metabolically unhealthy. You got to find your 12%. But once I changed too, like I was really surprised how a lot of people came up to me, what are you doing? Like your attitude's better, you're happier, you know? And so I think, for anybody, just write down a couple things that mean something to you. And I would encourage you, pretty deep, a lot of people want to lose weight or they want to have more energy, but like maybe go a little deeper. Like, like I said, I was writing down like, man, I'm short with my partner. I'm unhappy in my job. Like these are big life things, like I don't want to be this person anymore. Like I genuinely wanted to be a better person, and I knew I could be. So yeah, that was kind of my first thing. And then, of course I was able to start running again. So that was another motivation for me, like I started dreaming because I felt so much better. Like maybe I could race again. So maybe if there's a dream out there, maybe if you want to start a business or travel or something,
Yeah. Wow. That's really, really powerful. I love that, really connecting with that deep why. And I'm grateful that you said that. We have to get deep. It's got to be real. It's got to really hit home, right? To be a good motivator, and really connect with something that's actually important to us. So thank you, Michelle. That's really, really beautiful, for sharing that. I want to touch on one other thing as well. And I know we were actually chatting just a little bit before we hit record here about this. And I think it's so important to talk about in this industry. And obviously a lot of my guests that I'm bringing in and the conversations that we're having, in this, low carb sort of space, there is a lot of tendency, just like with anything in life, right, to get really dogmatic, to get really, really kind of digging our heels in and closing our minds off and saying, this is the way, you have to do it. And I know there's a lot of people out there in the health space kind of preaching that, like on all sides, right? Like you must be vegan, you must be carnivore, you must like, this is the solution for all of humanity. And I'm just curious your thoughts on that and like how we navigate a world where there is so many like polarizing, very, very committed people, trying to lead the charge and say, this is the one way for all. What are your thoughts on that? And how do we kind of maybe soften and navigate that we're all different and kind of finding a flow for each of us can be different?
Yeah, first of all, I totally validate that, and I see that, and I think that's hard. And I've also, I know for me, like when I first, entered the space and I went basically carnivore for 30 days, I had so much healing that I know for many people it can be kind of hard to like step outside of that, because it's like, well, I was carnivore and I'm healing, and people will hold on to this way of eating, though, even if it starts to maybe not serve them. It's like, well, now I've done this for a couple months and I'm not feeling as good, but I'm scared to add carbohydrates back, or I'm scared to add more calories. And so I think we have to be very open, because the human body, like things change and evolve as our goals change and evolve too. And just even as we grow and go through different like life stages, how I eat when I was, obviously first started this is very different than how I do now. As I'm running, I'm healthy and my gut is healed. And so, I don't know if I have an answer on how to necessarily soften this, but I think we have to be open, and I think, I do believe, like in human physiology and evolution, I do think there tends to be a foundation that I think works very well for many people. But I think we have to be very careful to not kind of like pigeonhole everyone into a certain thing because the nuances are very different. Like how I eat as an athlete, I have probably more carbohydrates than most people. Some people, eat certain foods that other people are not going to, and that's okay. And I think it's a problem if we tell somebody like, well, you always have to be carnivore. You can only eat this amount of carbs. Like we honestly in nutrition, nobody knows exactly what's right. Like we have lots of evidence, for certain disease states and for things that like low carb can work. And, I certainly think it's a very, something that I do and follow. But I think we need to be just open. Like I'm not afraid of being wrong. I'm not afraid to change, to evolve, to grow. And I think, when we're guiding people and when we're helping people, we have to kind of help them once again with that kind of base, but then encouraging them to be open and to, if things change, we can move, change, and adjust. Because the worst thing, and I see this happen to some people, is they continue to follow something that maybe helped them at one point, but is no longer working. So
Yeah. Oh, so powerful. I love that. Just staying open and being willing, like this is a topic for a whole nother podcast, but being willing to be wrong. Like how many of us just get so stuck in our way that we just like, we can never be wrong, right? Because we've got all sorts of other reasons about what that means about us if we're wrong, right? And look throughout history, like humans are still figuring it out. Like, I think it's really important to be humble and understand that, yeah, our bodies change, science changes, like the food we're eating is constantly changing, and we need to be open to that shifting. I know the way of eating has changed lots. I used to be vegetarian. Now I eat meat again. Like it shifts and that's okay. And, I think anyone out there who's, following someone who's really like, I think we just need to be really careful about this like dogmatic approach. Like if there's someone out there who's preaching like this way or the highway or you're going to die, like maybe don't follow that person because like we have,
and there's people too that it's like, oh, well now it's okay to eat honey. Or now it's okay to do this. It's like,
yeah.
you know what, just.
Yeah. I saw a great
I
post
feel like
the
it's a
other day,
little
somebody
silly.
making an argument for why it's so great to eat sugar. There was like this whole, I forget who it was, and it just like, I read it and I was just like, I can't read this. But I'm also open to like, maybe there's some good points in there. I don't know. But yeah, I like that you said, for most of us, there is that base. And I often just have that thought, like, can you imagine if everyone on the planet just ate real food that could be grown on a farm? Whether it's a plant or not, like, can you imagine even just that, right? I think the biggest step, most people are at that place where they just need to get off the fake stuff. And just that change is going to be monumental. And then obviously we can get more nuanced. We can get into these more therapeutic, very healing ways of eating and even lowering carbs more. But I mean, can you just imagine if everybody stopped eating processed food? Like that's my goal. Just, I don't care what you do after that.
Like, knew a farmer, and if you unfortunately if you don't live close enough to a farmer, like get online, meet a farmer, talk to them. We have a farmer. We're lucky we only live an hour away, but just like so many people are so far removed from their food. It's like that see what it's like to have an animal, see what it's like to grow plants, see what it's like it's. Yes, I'm with you. Because if you and I would encourage anybody. I mean, this is something everybody can do. When you're at the grocery store, just look around. Like most people in their carts, there's no food in there. There's cereal and granola bars. That's not food. Like eating real food is amazing first step. And if we all did that, I mean, we would change the health of our planet very quickly. But yeah, I mean, that's my goal and my hope would people would get back to like, a White Oak Pastures calls it radically traditional farming. So maybe like radically traditional eating, like things you grow, things you hunt, things you kill,
Yeah. Yeah. And even that, I mean, that's again, another topic for another story, but we hunt like, and it is one of the most powerful experiences in connecting with your food. Like, especially if you're going to eat meat, I think you need to, like, for me, I feel like spiritually and energetically, I need to be a part of that process. Like I have to be there to give respect for that. And that's kind of.
Oh, and it's so beautiful. Like for me, like I had no idea how powerful it was even just to like, I've been now to part of the butchering and slaughtering process, like, because
Yeah.
this is like an animal giving its life for me,
Yeah.
and I'm going to eat this. I'm going to be a healthy human,
Yeah.
and it's just like, uh, we, people just don't see this anymore. They don't do this, and it
No.
just makes you like grateful and almost feel like honored to be eating this
Yeah.
way versus just like grabbing something at the store. So,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
I totally feel like if we and you and I could probably do a whole podcast about life skills, but we've as a society we just lack some basic, growing food, eating food, cooking food, like life skills. So
Yeah. Yeah. And because they've become not a priority, right? It's more important to produce, to work 12-hour days, to make money, to buy the big house, to do, I mean, there's a lot of things. You're right. This is a podcast for another day. So,
no,
and
it
I want to
totally
be
is.
respectful.
But you know what? It's really interesting. I
Yeah.
know we need to wrap up, but like when I worked, I remember thinking like, man, if I can just get a job to where I can, because we grew up, we didn't have a lot of money growing up. I'll be so happy if I just do that, and I was miserable.
Right.
And money, you need enough money certainly to live and to have out, to shelter and food and all that basic stuff, but happiness isn't working a zillion hours or whatever. I mean, it's finding something you're passionate about and being able to, hopefully make some money doing it. But yeah, we have a very false narrative in this society that you need to work 2 million hours and never rest and don't take care of yourself. And in my experience, that genuinely does not lead to a healthy human.
No, it definitely leads to a whole lot of anxiety and stress and overwhelm and eating to cover that up, right? It's this cycle. Yeah, I've really learned that in my own like inner journey over the last 6 years, like learning to slow down because I'm a type A, like high performer, get all the things done, check all the things off the to-do list because that means I'm worthy or successful, right? And there's so many deeper layers to that. Okay, we're going to have you back to have that conversation. Like, I got to catch myself there. So, as we wrap up, like if there was one message that you had, to really sum everything up that you want to share, for someone who's maybe in poor health, either physically or mentally, or really just struggling right now, what would you share with them? What's your main message?
Yeah, my main message is the body and the brain have a tremendous capacity to heal, like beyond what anyone has led you to believe. Often we're in doctors or in a hospital setting and they're just like, oh man, this doesn't look good. Or your body and brain, like you are not too far gone. It doesn't matter if you're 6 or, 105. Like it is amazing how much the body wants to get back to homeostasis. Like once you start shifting how you eat, you can see an impact within weeks. So that would be like my main message.
Oh, that's so beautiful. What a great reminder, right? Our body wants to heal itself if we let it, if we provide the right environment. Thank you, Michelle. That's so good. So where can everybody find more about you and what you're doing online? And obviously come and buy your book. Where can
Oh
everybody
yeah,
find that?
thank you. So my book is The Dietitian's Dilemma, and it's, my story, and it's on Amazon. I've got a paperback, an ebook, and the Audible. And I'm on Instagram at Run Eat Meat Repeat, all one word. You can find me on Twitter at Michelle Hurn RD, and my website, thedietitiansdilemma.net.
Amazing. I'll make sure all those links are below the show here for anybody. And thank you so much, Michelle. This was so powerful. I really appreciate you sharing your story and the difficult times that you've been through and how you really had the courage to navigate out of that and now spread this message. And hopefully all of you listening had some big eye-opening moments. I know I really did. I love learning from you, and we're excited to have you back again in the future, Michelle.
Anytime. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you for tuning in to another episode. If you're loving what we talked about today, please remember to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone you love. And if you're ready to dive deeper into discovering your root causes and patterns that are keeping you hooked on sugar, be sure to check out our brand new free workshop series that will help you kick emotional eating for good. Find the link to download this free series and other amazing resources in the show notes below.